characteristics of communication problems vary depending on the area of damage in the brain for each classification of aphasia. So aphasia can be classified either by the area of known damage in the brain or characteristics of the communication. And so what we'll go through is the expressive and receptive characteristics of language and the definitions of those, and then we'll talk about how that relates to each specific type of aphasia. So for expressive language or spoken language, people with aphasia could have anomia, which is just difficulty naming things, objects, or people. So anomia, if you break it down, a is without, and nomia is naming. And we have paraphasias, which are word or sound substitutions, and we can break that down into three ways. We can have phonemic paraphasias, which is a sound substitution related to phonemic changes. So if we say the cat is in the tree, but instead we say the bat is in the tree, we've had a phonemic paraphasia. We're just changing the simple sounds within the word. You can have a verbal paraphasia, which is related to kind of the morphemes or the meaning of the word. So it could be instead of the cat is in the tree, the dog is in the tree. It's a related animal. Or you can have a neologism, which is a new or made-up word. So instead of saying banana, they might say na-na-na-na-na-na-na. They could also have jargon, which is related to neologisms, but it doesn't have to be a neologism. So it's irrelevant or meaningless speech, meaning that they are creating new words that are neologisms and using them in sentences, or they're producing completely nonsensical sentences. They could have agrammatism, which again we can break that down into a without and grammar for grammaticism. So that's just omission of grammatical elements. So instead of saying I went to the store, I could say went store. And there are perseverations where they could have the same response to different questions. So this just essentially means that they have one response. They're going to say that response to anything that you ask, or they can perseverate on a topic. So this could be, how are you doing today? Yes. Are you feeling well? Yes. Do you have pain in your foot? Yes. And it doesn't mean that they are expressing any of those as, yes, they do have pain in their foot, yes, they are doing well. It could be that they don't understand what you're asking for the question, and their quick response is yes, or they say yes to everything, and so it's very difficult to understand exactly what they're trying to say. They could also have verbal stereotypes or neologisms, and stereotypical answers. So, how are you doing today? Da 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 da. Do you have pain in your foot? Da 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 da. And so they'll use those over and over again. For the receptive side of language or comprehension, there's agnosia, or difficulty understanding the meaning of sensory information, and we're going to break that down into two separate types. We have visual agnosia, which means that if I'm looking at an object, I can't name it just by looking at it. So if I hold my glasses in my hand, I can see that there is an object in my hand, but I can't tell you that they're glasses, and I can't tell you that they're different from keys, or a tie, or a pen. Then there's auditory verbal agnosia, and that means that you can't recognize the meaning without seeing the object. So you can see glasses written on a piece of paper, but until the glasses are in front of you, you don't know what they are. And there are very good YouTube videos available on both of those if you'd like to go search for those for examples. Now, as far as reading and writing go, I see now that I've made a mistake on the slide for agraphia and alexia. Agraphia is actually difficulty writing, and alexia is difficulty reading, and it's related to that sensory information. Alexia is a subcategory of dyslexia, but it's related to neurological impairment, not a developmental disorder, but an acquired disorder resulting from injury to the language area of the brain related to reading. So now we'll go into the different types of aphasia. We're going to talk about primarily auditory comprehension, word repetition, and naming. So as far as auditory comprehension, do you understand what's being said? Word repetition, if I give you a word, can you repeat it back to me? And that's more of a receptive language measure. And naming, if I show you a picture or describe an object, can you name that object for me? And that's more of an expressive ability. So for global aphasia, there's damage to multiple areas of the brain in the language areas. It's a non-fluent aphasia, so it's going to look more like a Broca's aphasia more than a Wernicke's aphasia, which is our two kind of major categories of aphasia, or common types of aphasia. So they're going to have deficits in all areas: in auditory comprehension, understanding what's being said, in word repetition, and in naming. For Broca's aphasia, it's obviously damage to Broca's area. It's a non-fluent aphasia, so they're going to have that effortful speech. It might be agrammatical or missing those grammatical elements. And it might look like they are searching for words, or they're trying to pull words together into sentences. But different from Wernicke's, they don't have trouble naming, so it's not essentially word finding, it's just pulling those words together into meaningful sentences. But they do have good auditory comprehension. Then we have transcortical motor aphasia, which is related to damage near but not at Broca's. And so it can be just in front of Broca's area or just above. It's also a non-fluent aphasia, but it has only trouble with naming, but not with repetition, in contrast to the Broca's. Then we have mixed transcortical, which is, again, damage to multiple areas, but they're going to have good repetition, but poor naming and comprehension. And then we have Wernicke's aphasia, which is, again, one of those more common types of aphasia, more common classifications. It's damage to Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe, and it's a fluent aphasia, meaning that they can produce fluent, effortless stream of thought, but it might not have any meaning. They could have trouble with naming, with repetition, and with auditory comprehension. And then there is the transcortical sensory, related to damage in the temporal lobe. And so it is again, fluent aphasia. And when we're looking at our non-fluent and our fluent, I'll go ahead and tell you, non-fluent's related to more of the area of the motor production of speech, whereas the fluent aphasias are going to be more related to the meaning of speech. So can we produce meaningful speech even if it is in a stream of information? So if I say something like that's fluent. There is a fluid flow of information, but it doesn't mean anything at all. And so for the transcortical, they can have difficulty with comprehension, but have good repetition and poor naming. Then conduction aphasia is damage to that arcuate fasciculus, so that transport of information from the Broca's to the Wernicke's. It could also be damage in the parietal lobe, which the arcuate fasciculus kind of arches into. It's a fluent aphasia, primarily related to poor repetition and poor naming, but good auditory comprehension. And then we have anomia, which is not the anomia that's a characteristic of aphasia. There is an anomia aphasia. We don't quite know what causes anomic aphasia, just because there are multiple language areas in the brain responsible for naming. But we do know that it is more of the more mild aphasias, because the only thing that it has difficulty with is with naming. There's no other difficulties related to that type of aphasia.